Hello and welcome to the Customer Conversations podcast. Today I'm excited to be joined by the fabulous Adrienne Barnes. Adrienne is a B2B SaaS content marketer and strategist who's advised and written for top B2B SaaS companies, including Stripe, Drift, and Demio. She's also the founder of Best Buyer Personas. Adrienne, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Cool. I'm very excited for this conversation. I know we talk a fair amount and have talked a fair amount about some of the topics that we're going to dive into today.
Yeah.
But for those who sort of don't know you and don't know your work, maybe we can describe sort of what you do typically for the companies that you work with.
Yeah. So I have kind of a range of services. Content marketing is mostly where in that kind of engagement, I get hired by usually a small marketing team who's trying to ramp up content, but just doesn't have the time to write and really like dive into things like that. So for those clients, I do a lot of the writing. And then other clients really like they are just beginning. They're just trying to figure out where they're going. And they need a lot more of like heavy-handed buyer persona, like that whole research, audience research. And then we create strategies from that. And then I have other clients who are those B2B bootstrap founders. It's like one or two people, maybe there's a co-founder. They know that they want to build their audience before and while they build their product. And so they come to me and together we work together to kind of create a strategy. And those are really customized engagements where it's been everything from I'm helping them email their audience, try to get surveys, do interviews, to they've already got their audience down and we're really looking at creating content strategies or pulling the thousands of ideas. I love founders because they're inventors and they're creative and they're idea people. And sometimes they have too many ideas. And so what I do really well is like help them kind of narrow that down, channel it, put them into focus and make it really an effective content strategy so that they can begin to build their audience while they build their product.
Amazing. So I guess one, you mentioned there that you're often working with founders who have a million things going on, a million ideas, and the focus is sort of the name of the game and making sure that the things they're doing are actually impactful for moving the business forward. So what's typically your starting point in all of this? Because there's obviously sort of a lot going on. How do you sort of dial in and get started?
Yeah. So with the what I call done with you strategies, that's for the founders. It's a low cost engagement essentially for them. We really just begin with a conversation. I get on the phone with them. We go on a chat. We're trying to figure out where are you at? Where's your starting point? If they say, yeah, I've talked to founders and they're like, no, we've done thousands of hours. I hired interns and we've got tons and tons and tons of data and customer conversation, qualitative data. I just don't know what to do with it now. So in those kinds of engagements, I go through it, I help categorize it, theme it out, and then show them really like, this is where your content is headed. I've had other founders where they're like, no, I don't know. I know this is a good thing, but I haven't talked to anybody really about it yet. So then that's what's like, okay, we create surveys and we get on the phone with they have a few best customers and I get on the phone with them and really pull that data out for them. So it really does depend on where they are on where the engagement is. But I always start with audience research. Either the question is, how much have you done? And if the answer is like none, then we do it. And if the answer is a ton and they just don't know what to do with it, then we go from there. So it's always beginning with who are you building for? Let's start there.
That totally makes sense. And I know that's something that I talk to customers and to clients about a lot is, how do you get started with that particular step, right? Like what are the things that we're actually trying to learn about our customers? So maybe you can sort of speak to that aspect. Like what are the sort of first questions that you have for somebody who's done, and I guess in some cases it doesn't matter too much unless they've done, a lot of research that hasn't given, and they've looked at it and it hasn't given them the answers they want. But for somebody who's sort of just getting started, needs to answer, I guess the first question is, what are the questions that I should be trying to answer about my audience to help inform this content strategy that we're going to put together?
Yeah. So I like to know basically why someone is using the product, what triggered them to buy. And it's all about that jobs to be done approach. Like what job are they hiring the product to do? Why did they come to you? so I ask a lot of questions like, if, what was the thing that you were trying to accomplish before you purchased this product? Or tell me about right before you bought the product. Tell me about the process of buying it. Really, because I want to go to those, like the core emotions of it. So I'll ask these kind of first, just kind of vague questions, not really specific, not really like hammering down a specific point. I'm not looking for an answer. But then I find that the best comes in the follow-up. So like a lot of the best stuff is like, oh, that's really, tell me more about that. Like, oh, so you mentioned that you were struggling with this thing. Can you explain to me a little bit more around like what was going on there? And that's where like the gold, just kind of the bits come out. Usually it doesn't take a whole ton of like questions. I don't have a list. I don't have a strict script to stick to. I want to ask, I mean, typically even when the recipient, the person that we're talking to has a lot to say and is free flowing in the conversation, I could ask maybe 2 or 3 and get like a really good conversation out of that. Why did you purchase? And then like, oh, okay, tell me more. And then like, how are you using it now? Or what do you find most frustrating about it? I like to ask even the negative questions, even though sometimes that makes my founders cringe because they're like, no, don't make them think about negative. But I'm like, we want to know what doesn't fit, because it's not going to be a negative for everybody. But if it's a negative for them, we want to know who are the people that are likely to turn, because we don't want to talk to them. We don't want to advertise to them. We don't want to target them. We kind of want to shift it to the people who are like, nothing. This thing has been great. Every step of the way has just been amazing. So yeah, that's kind of where we start with the which questions do I ask? Definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned, that there is no script, right? That it's very sort of free flowing and it's just a conversation. I think you use conversations, customer conversations as the way to describe sort of the data that founders might have about their customers. And I guess that data can come in many forms, right? You mentioned interviews, you mentioned surveys.
Mm-hmm.
Where's typically your sort of starting point or your bias in terms of sort of what is the right way or the right sort of channel to capture all these conversations through? Because really, and I guess the answer is probably it depends, right?
Yeah.
If a company is more established and has, maybe hundreds or thousands of support tickets, that's a very different place to be than just starting out with no real audience yet.
Yeah. I find it depends not necessarily just on the audience, but on what we need the information to do. If we know something is true, or we think something is true, and we send a survey out and we find out that yes, what we thought was true, sometimes that's like an information bias, right? We're just kind of creating our own, the cycle of like, well, we think this, so we're asking this, they said yes, now we're right. And that cycle just kind of continues on. I like to use you're only going to be able to get emotions and feelings and motives out of a conversation. You're not going to get at least very good information on someone's like drivers from a survey. So surveys are good for like, why did you show up? I like really short surveys. So surveys at the close of a cart, or right at onboarding. Hey, what brings you here? Like quick 3-question kind of surveys that will help you segment your audience. Those are great. But they're not going to give you those like content copy insights that are going to help drive that core emotion of like, why is this person reading? How can we address their struggles? What are they, the problem that they're trying to solve, and how are they describing that problem? So you may understand what their issue is, but you're never going to get how are they speaking about it on a survey. So that's kind of how I like to differentiate between a conversation and a survey.
Yeah, that makes sense. You need to go beyond the what and really dig into, why is this the answer that they gave in a given survey. It's always really interesting to me when you run a lot of surveys with both LearnWhy but with previous things. It's always really interesting to see what people put in the other box, which I totally agree. Still not the same level of depth or the same sort of fidelity of insight as a live conversation with somebody. I don't think there's sort of really any way to beat that for depth of insight. But it's always really interesting to see what people put that you didn't select as an option for them to multiple choice, which is often things that are pretty unexpected.
Yeah. it would be the part of the conversation where if you were having a quick 20 to 30 minute chat, you'd be like, oh, wait a second, what was that again? Like, can you tell me that that's the thing? And now you're on a
Right.
survey, you're reading another, and you're like, dang, that's really good, but I wish I could learn a little bit more. Like, I wish I could figure out why they said that, or the thing behind that. But now you've got it in a qualitative data on a survey, and okay, that's great, but you could have done more with it with the conversation, I feel like.
Right. Where do you find is the right balance of conversations versus sort of, which are obviously one-to-one and
Mm-hmm.
less scalable is maybe the wrong word, but it's a very, sassy word. What do you feel is the right balance between conversations that you know are more time intensive, both on the side of you and the company, but also on the customer side, right? That they're also
Mm-hmm.
investing in spending time there, versus sort of the breadth of data that you can pull from a survey that can reach many more people.
Yeah. So, I mean, are you asking about like which one? Reiterate again the conversation, the question.
Yeah, so I guess sort of, is there a balance to be struck between the two? I'm sure that it's not
Okay.
totally black and white, right?
Right.
Between, we should only be doing only be having conversations versus only be doing surveys. Like, there's sort of,
I,
where's the right
yeah.
mix?
I think so. The balance would definitely be you can do both, and I think you should do both. Some people want it, who like us, who are really into the qualitative and the one-on-one conversations. They can have a tendency to push away surveys and be like, no, there's no need for them, but of course there is. Surveys will give you a lot of information about a lot of people very quickly, and that's useful and that's beneficial. um, but I think you should balance it out with a conversation. Um, and it shouldn't be an either or. I don't think there's a stance where it's like, oh, this is the only part that's good and only use this
Right.
start for surveys and then only do this for conversations. Anytime you're starting something new, anytime you're launching, anytime you're building, um, get on the phone. And it doesn't have to, I think people feel like, oh my gosh, if I'm going to do, customer conversations, I have to get on the phone with 25 people and it's going to be like every week and that's 45 hours and I don't have the time to do that. So let's just send out one survey. And I don't feel like that's true. I feel like if you implement in your process conversations, like you have one or five a week, and they you're only asking five questions. Like, I'm on a call today with somebody who's about to launch a product. I'm their target audience. It's a 15-minute chat, and he's speaking with like five or six people. It doesn't have to be time intensive. It doesn't have to be this oppressive thing if you just do a little bit of time. And it's one of those things, it's like compound interest. It will build upon itself. The more conversations you have, the better off you'll be, the more you'll know. And it can be those small little, just a daily habit. Put it in a part of your routine, a part of your weekly habit. Monday, you talk to two people, and that can be it. It doesn't have to be like, okay, we're starting this thing and it's got to be huge. Just make it a part of, and it should be a part of a continuous process, because we're all you should be learning always. Your market's shifting, your product can be refining, there's new iterations, so there's always something new to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love the way that you put that it's, what can you do to make this a habit, right? It doesn't have to be this big, sort of song and dance around, this is a huge research survey that we're going to do. It's going to take a month,
Right.
and we're then going to put that in a corner. And, we did that survey or that study one time. That's what we do. Right.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but
that's what happens. And that's
mhm,
why the data becomes overwhelming, because it
yeah,
sits in this large, huge Google spreadsheet that nobody looks at. Like, it's just
right.
sitting there, even if it's divided up and organized into themes and like pain points and things like that. It's a to-do list. Essentially, you've
Right.
added a to-do list, which why I think you and I both are really like strong and like, no, let's provide the actual action items that can be done from the qualitative data. I think that's
Right.
something you and I both agree on. As researchers, it's not just something like, okay, here's a huge 40-page spreadsheet with all of this, information, and have fun with it. It's really good information. You're going to learn a lot. And
Right.
so now it's on a manager's desk, and they're like, they've got 8 billion things going on. That's why they hired us in the first place, is because
Right.
they had too much to do. Um, it needs to be made simple. And I think if it's the manager who's like, no, I'm really passionate about doing the qualitative data and doing the interviews on our own, if they can make that a part of their routine, it won't be this oppressive, like once a year annual push of thing that just sits. It can be really like, yeah, on Monday we have chats, and then we can iterate that and we can start to focus on it, and you'll see trends. You'll start to see your trends well before like your market would show it to you, essentially through like product or advertising or things like that. Your people will tell you. So in a matter of like a couple of weeks, you're like, oh, this is where things are shifting, and you can like almost be ahead of it. Whereas if you're just doing like paid ads or, you know, content pushes or things like that, SEO, you end up finding it after the fact. A conversation will allow you to be like preventative, like active, proactive rather than reactive.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That's sort of where building a habit around this and making it a continuous practice is so valuable, because, and you said this already, that it's not only will you see trends, but you'll see the compound effect of tracking those trends over time, right? And you'll also be able to see things, you know, how at this point in time we compared to people were considering us against this alternative like this, but now they're considering us against this new player in the field who has a different value prop and is positioned differently to us. And that there's a new, people are saying new things about new competitors. Like the market is never standing still. Like there is not sort of like solving for a point in time is great, but only for that point in time.
Yeah. I mean, and can you imagine the companies who already had this in practice before COVID hit, like right now when things have shifted so dramatically?
Right.
I mean, they would have had this already going, already implemented, and been able to respond faster in their copy, in their content, when their clients were ready for it, when their customer base was ready for it. What I noticed a lot with this situation was that it took people 2 weeks to ramp up to be able to respond in these unprecedented times, and and COVID was everywhere. But by the week 2 or 3, audiences were sick and tired of hearing about it. Like we were all like, please stop saying unprecedented times. Right. But had they said it on day 3, had they been able to like react, they would have been the first ones. By week 3, they would have been done, and they would have known, okay, our audience is sick and tired of this. Now what do they need? Now let's reiterate. Now let's build. So, I mean, this is obviously an extreme circumstance, but it happens like that slightly all the time.
Right. Yeah. This has just sort of been an accelerator of existing trends, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that we talked about sort of is why it's important to do this on an ongoing basis, why it's important to sort of build this muscle, for a lack of a better word, around sort of doing ongoing discovery, is how do you track all these things? How do you keep everything that you're learning organized and turn it into a way, and so more importantly than organizing it, how do you actually start using that in all the other activities that you're doing? Because it's certainly not unique to just having an impact on copy. It has an impact in a lot of places.
Exactly. And what a pain point that is, right? Like, so the solutions right now, which is why I'm so excited about LearnWhy, but right now you've got a Google Doc spreadsheet that someone can come in and organize. Somebody like me who's a little nerdy and like likes to color code it and thematic and things like that. Excel spreadsheet. And that's about it. That's about all the tools I use right now for them. It's just, there's not a great way. There are a lot of heavy researcher tools, like scientists who do this for research, and their tools are ugly. Number 1, they're just not cute to use. Number 2, it's very technical. Like I've been in them, I've tried to use them, and it's so it's set up for a scientific researcher. So you're tagging like words and things like that to go back and make hypotheses and build upon your science experiment. And they're doing years, like you're talking, like most of these kinds of like scientists are watching and doing these experiments for 10, 5, years. Whereas we want really quick turnaround, right? Like we want these insights, we want to build on it, we want to be able to make an action. So that's basically what I do. I just put it into a spreadsheet, and block them out by themes. And then I'm able to tell, like, me personally, like, okay, look, so this is kind of what they're saying when they talk negative, and this is how they're praising and the positive words they use, and these are their descriptor words. Like, what I call those relational keywords. This is where these are the words your audience is using that's very specific to your product. So we need to use this in your copy. I kind of use the sneaker example. If you are selling shoes and all of your audience calls shoes sneakers and not tennis shoes, well, in your ad copy and your content, we're not going to call them tennis shoes. We're going to call them sneakers. Just simple things like that. So, and then I just pull those out basically in a doc and kind of make a whole presentation out of it. So there's not like a really simple, streamlined, beautiful way, which is why I'm excited about LearnWhy.
Yeah, I think that, and this is certainly one of the pain points that drove sort of starting LearnWhy, was that, and there, I would say there are certainly a number of tools sort of in between, like the academic sort of research analytics, kind of the wrong word, like organization tools. There are certainly like tools that are targeting UX researchers. But again, the same challenge is that they're targeting researchers, right? And that the people that we're talking about who want to use these insights are not researchers, right? Like their title is not researcher, but B, they have, research is just a component which sort of drives everything else that they're doing, whether they're a content writer, whether they're running ad creative, whether they're creating, strategy, growth strategy, whatever it might be. Research is just sort of an input to that process rather than being their sole job. So that it's certainly a time-consuming challenge, and I think that there's a big opportunity here to help make these things that are so important, and make these insights that are so important to keep track of more actionable in everybody's sort of day to day.
Yeah. Because if you're not able to, like we said earlier, like hand somebody things that say, these are the differences, these are the choices, this is the changes that you can make based upon all of this research that's going to make an impact, then you're handing them homework, and nobody wants homework.
Right. And it's homework that gets more difficult, or not necessarily more difficult, but certainly more time consuming the more data you have.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? And this is something that I've found, like, as I'm doing discovery for LearnWhy, we do follow that process ourselves, but
it's kind of meta.
Yeah, it does get meta very quickly. But something that's been really interesting to me is the number of people who've said and have shown, we did the survey, we did the interview, we took the first step and collected data, but we didn't really have a plan for turning that data into action.
Yes.
Because go ahead.
This is interesting. So there's an old co-schedule statistic. I knew I would want my stats handy because I was going to do this. That says 64% of marketers, or 80, they have a high percentage of marketers don't do any research. And those who do see 644% better results. It's something like that.
We'll link it up in the show notes. We'll make sure it's accurate.
Yes, I have an article on LinkedIn that has it, so you can find it there really easy. It's a hard graphic to find, I will tell you, to cite. But then yesterday I was looking up this same kind of information because I'm always curious, are people doing research yet? And I think in the last 2 years, it has caught on. Marketers know we have to do it. So HubSpot's data that I found yesterday, there was a 2019 report, and we'll link this in the show notes too, because I could be wrong. It was 80% of marketers are now doing audience research. So like you said, they're doing it. Now, are they using it? Do we know how to use it? Do we know how to take what we've learned, what our audience says, and apply that to our actual content strategies, or to our entire marketing strategy? I always think very content strategy because that's my strength and my focus. But, if you're an overall marketer, if you're a general marketer, a marketing manager, and you're managing all aspects of marketing, do you know how to take the audience research you're learning and apply it to your strategy, to your skills? Can you see the trends? That's a wholly different skill set. That's a different ballpark, really.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting to see sort of tracking this hate to call it transformation, such a buzzword, but sort of over time, as these things, as these trends emerge, it's very similar to me to how sort of trends in product have emerged, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that people have moved from building things end to end up front, and then finding out later if people will use it, to
Yeah.
sort of more iterative testing as testing of solutions as we go, to more sort of shortening that loop with discovery as an integrated component, to sort of making sure that not only are we doing the research up front, but we're also doing the research on the back end, right? That we're
Mm-hmm.
actually testing that the thing that we researched, designed, built, shipped actually had impact, and
Right.
really tying everything together in data.
Absolutely.
So
And
it's interesting.
I think the loops have gotten smaller, like you said. Like
Right.
we're no longer expecting massive perfection in even a final product. We expect for something to be shipped and then reiterated on, and then another version, and then another version, and then for the content, even a blog post. I don't expect that blog post that gets published to just sit there and stay there. I expect to go back to it, to update it, to refresh it, to change it a little bit. Um, yeah, and I think that's also just the expectation of the market. We're all like creating quickly, and we've kind of created a tolerance for it not being perfect the first time, because we know that we're gonna learn more and we're gonna adapt it. So
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting to, like I said, to sort of follow these trends. So I'm curious to sort of dive into the last few minutes here, all the different ways that we can apply insights, right? Because there's lots of different
yeah,
opportunities for it. I know you mentioned the sneaker example with using the exact phrase that sort of quoting your customers, right,
yeah.
in ad copy, is one example. What are some other ways that you I guess specifically in the content that you're writing, but also just sort of generally in marketing strategy that you're using insights?
Yeah. So I combine the relational keywords, that kind of term that I use, those clients' words, plus SEO. So when I just create an entire content strategy, I use that HubSpot, pillar content strategy where we're really working on a few focused keywords. But then I add in your clients' words, your customers' words. What are those pain points? So that helps me answer the how-to blog posts. Like, what do they need to know how to do? What are they already asking? That helps me write like just the general news kind of stuff. Are they interested in the company? Some customers are. Some customers are so ingrained in wanting to know about the company's culture and where they're moving and how the company treats their employees, that becomes a part of their buying decisions. Other customers could care less. They do not care at all. And it's even in B2B. Like, you'd think, oh, all B2B doesn't care. That's mostly when you're working with direct to consumers. That's not true. Other companies care how other companies are treating like their people, things like that. So that helps me just create the overall themes for like the blog post topics. So that's kind of how my brain works. Is it works like I start with a larger overall strategies of what are people searching? That's the SEO. And then what are people saying? And that's their relational keywords. And from there, I create blog post topics. And those overall arching topics, I can use their language in subheadings, directly in, like, just when I create an outline, oftentimes it's those like key points, it's those pain things, it's those questions when they're asking me like, well, I didn't understand this, I didn't know how to do that. Well, oh, okay, that's a blog post. Like,
Right.
that's exactly how it works in my head. And so that's how I create essentially 12 weeks of strategy off of, conversations and a 20-minute like SEO. It might be more than 20 minutes, but a quick SEO search. From there, it just kind of all falls in place. It gives us this strategy and the architecture for the SEO to do well, which is still important. You can't like completely negate that. That's still an important aspect of creating a content marketing strategy.
Right.
While also speaking to the people, while also speaking to the humans who are struggling or who have questions or who are trying to learn whatever this product is. Because that's the thing with my clients with B2B and software. They need to learn how to use it and implement it quickly. And they need to also like learn and have a brand awareness as well. It's not just like all how-tos. It also can be brand. So yeah, it whittles its way down all the way into just sentences in the content for me. It really does filter all the way through.
Amazing. So to sort of wrap things up here, if you were to talking to somebody who is in the 20% who is not currently doing research, who
Sure.
is not or even is in the percentage of that 80% who has done the research but isn't sure what to do with it next, what's sort of the one piece of advice that you would give them as a starting point to sort of start implementing some of these things that we've talked about and really take their content to the next level?
Yeah. So if it's find an hour in your week and make it possible. If that's not possible, then hire it out. Like there are people like me and Stuart who are focused on this, like this is the passion of what we do. But really for some of these clients, that's not in the budget. So find yourself an hour and do your phone calls and do your tagging, have it one standing doc and have your doc up while you're in the middle of the conversation, record it, get it transcribed, pay for like Rev, Timmy. I've heard of other even cheaper ones. Have it transcribed for pennies. I mean, it doesn't cost hardly anything to have it transcribed. And then pull out the interesting things, the positive things, the negative things, the emotional things. That's really what you're looking for. And put that in the doc. And every week you just continue to do that, and it will build upon itself, and you'll learn more, and you'll be able to really make decisions based on that better than you would if you were just like sitting here looking at Google Analytics, in my opinion.
Great. Well, I think that's certainly great advice. I think there are a lot of little steps that people can take to sort of incrementally improve the way that they make decisions that are in based on things that their customers are actually saying and actually important to their customers. So for people who want to learn more about you or hire you to do this type of thing for them, where should they go to find you on the internet?
I am at adriennenicole.com, which is Adrienne NAKOHL.com. Thanks,
we will
Mom.
link that up.
And just at Adrienne Nicole on Twitter. Twitter's I'm always on Twitter. Find me on Twitter.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for doing this. It was great to have you.
Thanks, Stuart. I appreciate it.
The Customer Conversations podcast is brought to you by the team at LearnWhy. LearnWhy integrates with all of your customer-facing tools to organize feedback and extract actionable insights. Empower your team to start growing your bottom line today with insights from qualitative data powered by LearnWhy. You can find out more at either learnwhy.co or by emailing our team at sales@learnwhy.co. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Customer Conversations podcast. If you or someone you know has expertise in growth, marketing, or product, please have them reach out to either Sean or Stuart to learn more about becoming a guest on our show. Our team can be reached by email at support@learnwhy.co.